and welcome to another Lawn Fawn video. Today we're taking a look at the new Shadow Box Card Fireplace Add-On. So here's a look at the die as it comes with all these pieces. So there is a die that will cut out the opening in the original Shadow Box box that is in the shape of a fireplace, and it has this nice stitching detail around the outside as well. And then I'm going to show you all the pieces that this die creates to create your fireplace. It will cut these two strips here with a stitching detail. One is the mantle that goes on top. And I've just cut all these out of white and colored them with Copic so we can see them very well. So this will go on top to create a mantle, and then this smaller one can go on the bottom to create the hearth. It can also be trimmed down to go around the sides if you want to wrap the entire box with these trim pieces, which you'll see me do in the card that we create today. There is also this piece that cuts the insert to go on the inside. So of course it has the score lines where you can fold the tabs, and you can add as many of these to the inside as you like. So you can just put them inside, and this will be where your fire goes. So I'm showing mine at the bottom. You could also put it at the top and put Santa's legs that are hanging down further into the fireplace. So you can use these to add as much depth as you want to the shadow box. There's also this die that will cut a trim piece that fits around the opening. So you can have that stitch detail like you have here, or you can cut something out of a colored cardstock and add a nice trim to the opening of your fireplace. There is also this die that cuts a nice garland to go up on the top to decorate, so you can hang that off the mantle or just above the fireplace. There's also a bow and some holly and some berries that you can use to decorate this as well. So there's also some dies in this set to cut Santa's legs that are hanging out of the fireplace, which I just think is so funny. So there's a die that cuts the pants, which I've cut out of white and colored with Copics here to get that nice darker shade at the top. There's a die that cuts the cuffs, so I've cut those out of white, and then there's a die that cuts the boots. So I actually cut those out of white and colored them with Copics just for my demonstration here, but you can cut those out of black cardstock as well, or whatever color you want his boots to be. And then you can see how that just fits right inside that fireplace, which is just so funny. There's also dies that cut pieces to create the fire. So there is a die that cuts the grate for the log to sit in, a die that cuts the log with those nice details of the wood grain on that log. And then there's two dies that cut the flame. So there's a large flame and a small flame. And you can cut these from different colors and layer them together to create your fire on that log, and that fits right inside the fireplace as well. There's also a die in this set that cuts a cute little stocking. It has a fun stitching detail that goes around it, and it also cuts a little slit at the top so that you can tuck things inside the stocking. There's a die that cuts the trim that goes around the top, which I'm just going to add to the top here. And then there's also a die that will cut the pieces to make a candy cane. So there's a solid candy cane, and then there is a stripe, and you can just layer these two together to create a die cut candy cane that fits into the stocking. So I said that there's a slit at the top, the die cuts, you can see there, and then you can just slide things inside the stocking. So let's make a shadow box card. So I'm using those pieces of the shadow box. They're cut from some narwhal cardstock, and I'm going to use my brick stencil to create a fun brick pattern on both of the pieces. So I've cut two of these, and I'm going to add the same stenciling to both pieces. I'm going to use my magnets and my mat to help hold mine in place. Sorry for my head. And because it's not quite the width to go across both sides of this at one time, I'm going to mask it off and I'm going to move it. So I'm just doing the front or the back, whichever, the larger side, and I'm using some Storm Cloud ink and an ink blending brush to add a layer of that gray ink to create a gray on gray, tone on tone brick look to my fireplace box. I'm actually trying to make it a little darker in some places and lighter in some places so that it's not too even and you kind of have this extra interest with the colors. So now that I've done that part, I can take my stencil and shift it over to the smaller side of the box, and I can line up that pattern with what I did on the larger side, and then it'll just look continuous. And I will, of course, repeat the same method on the other cardstock piece that I've cut to create the box. So you can see we have that nice brick pattern over that whole piece. So I've done both of them here, and then I'm going to go ahead and cut out the opening for the fireplace out of one of these. So I'm just going to line it up on the larger side of one piece, and I'm centering it up in that panel, and I'll just hold it in place with a little piece of tape and run it through my die cut machine. So now that these are both ready, I'm going to add some texture to these because I wanted it to look like old brick. So I'm using some black watercolor and adding some flecks of black all over it so it adds texture to this brick look. And I'm also going to do the same thing with some white watercolor. So I'm adding some big flecks just by tapping my paintbrush, but I'm also going to flick it off of a clear block, and this will give me smaller specks of color. So it really adds some depth to that stenciling of those bricks so it's not all one tone and you get this texture that's different across all the bricks. So I'll show you when I'm done. I'll hold it up to the camera so you can kind of see it better. But I did the black and then I did the white. So I've got some undertones and I've got some highlights on that gray. So we've got black, we've got the gray that's in the middle, and then we're going to add the white specks as well. And I didn't add as many white specks as the black, and I made sure that I did this off the block so they were small. So you can see how I have all that texture now, which I just think is so much fun and gives it a really cool look. And now I can start to assemble my box. So I'm going to add some double-sided tape to those tabs. Make sure I don't have any overhanging. I've already folded my box on the score lines. I did that before I even did the stenciling so that I could see better where those folds were going to be. So I'm just going to put the two pieces together. I'm not going to complete my box just yet. I'm going to add some elements to it. It's easier to work on it when it's flat, I feel like. And then here's the insert that goes on the inside. So for this one, I've cut that from that same narwhal cardstock, but you can see that since I don't have any of the inking on this, I definitely get a different look. I'm going to go ahead and put my fire together. So I've got some pumpkin spice cardstock for the big flame, and then I used some red sparkle cardstock for the little flame, and I had a little bit too much glue, so I'm just picking it up on the log so that I can use it to put the log in the grate. So there's the log in the grate. The log's cut from some paper bag cardstock. The grate is cut from some storm cloud cardstock. And then there's that glittery small flame in the middle, which I just think is so much fun. And then I can add my little fire to my log. So now my fire is done. And once it's dry, it kind of took a minute to stick to that glitter cardstock. It kept wanting to fall off. So I'm just going to add a little bit more glue and be a little more patient. I need to just let it sit for a second. But that is going to go on to the insert on the inside. So I'm going ahead and adding this before I put this inside my box because I just feel like it's easier to add when it's nice and flat like this. So now I'm going to add that to the box. So I've pulled off the liner tape off the one side. I'm going to line it up with the bottom of the box, stick it down, fold it back over. But before I actually complete it, I'm going to add my little Santa legs. So I used the same ones that I showed in my little demonstration. I colored them with these Copic markers so you get that nice fade from the light to the dark so you get a shadow. And I also colored those little boots with my black marker instead of using black cardstock. So I'm just going to glue the Santa legs to the back of the opening on the front. After I did this, I kind of wished I had added one of the inserts at the top of the box so that these legs could be at a layer sort of behind the opening so I had even more depth. But I'll just have to remember to do that on the next fireplace box that I create. And I've just got a little bit too much glue, so I'm just cleaning that up is what I'm doing there. So you can see how if I had put those legs on an insert, they would have been further back and they wouldn't have cast so much shadow on the fire. So that's just a little tip. The more you add, the more depth you can have to this box. I've got the mantelpiece cut from some ground espresso cardstock, and I'm just going to add that to the top. Now, you can line this up with the top of the box, but I wanted to have a little more height to my fireplace. So instead of lining it up with the top, like this, I'm just going to push it up a little bit and give myself even more height. Now, if you do line it up with the top, you only have to do one mantelpiece. But you can see since I pushed it up, it looks a little funny once the box is closed to only have that piece sticking up in the front. So I'm going to take that same die cut piece and I'm going to trim it down so I have a shorter piece for the sides. So I have to cut it to 2 1/8. And I'm going to make it look like that mantle wraps around the sides. So I'm just adding it to the short sides and I'm using my grid mat to make sure everything's nice and straight. So at first I only added it to the front and the two sides because I was wanting this look of the mantle that wraps around. So this was all I was going to do. So I'm going to add some double-sided tape to that other large tab on the box, and I'm going to finish up closing up my box. So I'm just going to lay this over to the side, pull off that liner tape, and I can close my box and it'll pick up that sticky for that inside insert. And then I can do the same for the rest of my box. I can peel that off and close the box. And that's when I realized it looked kind of funny to not have a piece on the back since I pushed this mantelpiece up above the edge of the box. So I'm just going to add another one so that it's complete all the way around. So I'm using some snow day papers. I've cut my stockings out of that pattern paper so they have this fun pattern on them. I've cut their trim pieces from some pixie dust cardstock so it's got some glittery details. And I'm just going to add all those trim pieces to those stockings. You can see I cut each stocking out of a different pattern paper so that everybody has their own pattern stocking hanging from the fireplace mantle. I've also got a candy cane here that I'm going to assemble using some red cardstock for the base and some white cardstock for the front. And then those candy canes will tuck right into that stocking. So I'm going to put holly in the other two stockings and a candy cane in this one. And then I've also got my garland piece cut from Cilantro cardstock that I'm going to decorate my mantle with. So I'm just going to add a few dots of glue to the garland. And add that to the mantle. I flattened my card out. It's a little easier to add these pieces when it's laying down flat on the desk. And then I've cut the bow from some red glitter cardstock. So it kind of pulls in that red glitter that I've got going on in my fire in the background out to the foreground and the front. And then I've got my Stockings placed where I want them, and I'm going to add the holly into the red stockings. So the holly leaves are cut from some noble fir cardstock so that they stand out against the cilantro cardstock that the garland's cut out of. And then I've cut the berries out of some chili pepper cardstock. And I'm just adding the holly and the berries to the other red stocking, and then I can glue that down. I'm going to kind of glue it higher so that the two stockings on the right side together look like they're hanging from the garland at an angle. And then I'll just glue down that teal stocking as well. I wanted to make sure they didn't cover up Santa's legs too much. And then here is our finished Shadow Box Fireplace card. So this will fold flat and go in an envelope, and then we'll pop up to this fun fireplace with Santa's legs hanging down over the fire. So I wanted to show you how to use this die set to create just a regular card that's not three-dimensional. So I have a piece of fog colored cardstock here, and I'm going to cut the opening of the fireplace from it. I've already got my other pieces cut as well. The mantle here is cut from some woodgrain cardstock, and my hearth is cut from some narwhal cardstock. And I'm just putting these here to kind of line it up and get my spacing. So I've cut this piece to be a slightly narrower than the mantle just because that's the look I wanted. And I wanted to move my opening to where it sits on the hearth at the bottom. So you can see I'm sort of shifting it down a little bit. And I actually change up what I use for the hearth because I wanted it to look a little thicker. So once I've got it lined up where I want it, I'm just going to hold it in place with a little bit of tape and run it through my die cut machine so that my fireplace opening is already cut. I'm going to be using the stencil to add some texture paste, so I want to go ahead and cut this opening out. So I'm using some temporary adhesive to hold it in place on my mat here, and I've got that magnetic mat behind my blending mat, so the magnets are going to hold my stencil in place. I just couldn't use the magnets on my piece of cardstock because I'm going to put paste over the whole thing. So I'm using some Ranger texture paste. This is white, but you can tint it with your inks. So I'm just putting a little bit on my craft mat. I've got some Crackling Campfire re-inker here. I'm just going to put a dot of that onto this texture paste. You don't need a lot because it's very concentrated. And actually the color was a little too orange for me once I got it mixed, so I added a drop of Festive Berries to kind of make it a little more red. So once I have this mixed, you can see now I've created my own custom colored paste. And this is texture paste, so it's kind of a matte finish and has a little bit of texture to it, and it's going to give us that look of brick. So I'm making a red brick fireplace, and then that fog cardstock is going to be the mortar between the bricks. And it had a really fun look when I got done. So I'm just adding this texture paste all over. I barely made enough, but it worked out. And I don't really need to worry about the bottom too much because there's going to be that hearth piece of cardstock at the bottom. So I'm just making sure I've got it all filled in and all covered. And then I can peel up that stencil and you get this really cool fireplace. So you get those really cool red bricks and that mortar behind it, which I just think is so much fun. So I'll set that aside to dry. And then I have a piece of vanilla malt cardstock, and I'm using some antique linen to add that same brick texture. And this is going to go behind the fireplace. So this is going to look like the firebox inside the fireplace because you know there's brick in there as well, but it's going to be much more subtle. So it just kind of fades off into the background. And I really only need to worry about putting that ink towards the bottom where the opening is going to be. So this is a very subtle tone on tone. I'm just checking to make sure I've got it where I need it and that it covers that whole opening. And you can see there's that subtle brick look, and that's going to be inside our fireplace. So I have a stitch rectangle that I cut from some Let It Shine paper, that cream with the gold dot. And then I also have a piece of the wood grain cardstock, and this is going to be the floor. Now I actually trim this down a little bit more when I figure out all the pieces on here, but I wanted to darken it up. So I'm just going to add a little bit of gathered twigs distressing to it, and it actually makes that wood grain stand out even more. So I'm just adding that with my blender brush all over to this little piece that's going to be the floor of my living room scene for my fireplace, and just darkening it up. And you can see how it makes that wood grain texture really stand out a little bit more. So I'm going to be using images from Christmas dreams to make my little scene. I've got that sleepy dog, some things to put on the mantle, and a bow to help decorate my garland. And I'm also going to use one of these mini picture frames to create a picture hanging above our fireplace. So I've cut that from some gold glittered cardstock, and then I've cut the inside from some sage cardstock. And I'm going to be using one of the shutter card sentiments that have a Merry Christmas to stamp in there for my sentiment, and it fits perfectly inside of this picture frame. So I've just got that. I'm going to stamp it with some black ink, and it's going to become part of our scene, but it's going to have the sentiment as well, which I just think is a really fun idea. So see how that fits perfectly. And now I can start to decorate my fireplace a little bit because my texture paste has dried. So I have that trim piece that the die cuts. You can see it's cut from black, and this is going to trim out my fireplace. This is going to help a lot with that texture paste, because sometimes you know how that paste can get a little bit messy on the sides of our cardstock. So this will just trim it out nicely and make it look nice and clean. So I've got that wood grain cardstock that's going to be my mantle up top, and I've got that storm cloud cardstock that's going to be the hearth at the bottom. And I actually decided to use the fatter piece for the hearth as well. So I have this nice thick top and thick bottom. So I am using my liquid glue to put this down, just especially because of that texture paste. So there's a little bit of that at the bottom, and I want to make sure that this sticks down really well. And then I'm going to do the same at the top with the mantle at the top. Again, this is out of that wood grain cardstock. So you can see how adding the ink to the wood grain cardstock on the floor makes it look different than the mantle. So you get these two different shades of brown. And then I decided I wanted to stack that thin and the thick one together for the bottom. So this kind of gives that hearth the look of like a cap that might stick out a little bit from the front of it. So I just thought this gave it even more depth. And so I've just added both of those, one on top of the other. I'm going to add my garland here that's cut from some noble fir cardstock. Just added a few dots of glue, and that's going to hang on my mantle at the top. And then the bow from Christmas Dreams is the one I'm going to use on this particular card. So you could also use the bow in the die set, but I just thought that this tied in with the other stamped images. So for the fire, I have the large flame cut from some sunflower cardstock and the small one cut from some orange glitter cardstock. The log is cut from some paper bag, and then the grate is cut from black cardstock. So I'm just going to layer all these pieces together just like I did before for the shadow box. And then for the ground, once I figured out my spacing with all my elements, it was a little too much. The floor was a little too wide. So I'm just trimming it down. So you're just going to get just the slightest ground below the fireplace. I've put some foam adhesive on the back of my fireplace, and I'm just going to line it up and put the firebox behind it. So this will give the fireplace a little bit of depth and dimension. And then now I have a place to add my fire. So for this particular one, I'm not using that curved insert. I'm just going to put the fire lined up right with that hearth at the bottom. And I just think that is just adorable. So now I can put my little sleeping dog curled up next to the fire, having a little Christmas nap. And then I've got my cookies for Santa and the milk. I'm going to add that to the back of the hearth. And then I realized I really didn't need to add it there first. I could add it with foam later. So I waited on the other two pieces that are going to go on top of my fireplace. And I've added my ground, my floor, to my die cut pattern paper. I like using this. It looks like wallpaper to me, the cream with the gold dots. And I'm going to add this to a card base made from kraft cardstock. So it's just going to tie in with those warm colors that we have in our little scene here. I'm going to go ahead and add a foam square to the back of the cookies and milk, and then I'll just put my whole fireplace down. So I'm going to go ahead and add my gold frame because it's going to be tucked behind some of these things that are sitting on the mantle. And then I can add my clock, which I'm going to put on a little piece of foam so it sits up like it's on the front of the mantle, and then I'll put my candle directly onto the background so it's sitting behind the clock. And then I can add my insert into my frame, and there's my sentiment. So I've also cut some stockings from some chili pepper cardstock, and I'm just going to add those just to the right side. So I kind of liked the balance of the stockings on the right and the sleepy dog on the left. And then I also have the little bone that's wrapped up with a bow from Christmas Dreams, and I'm just going to put that there as well because the little dog needs a present for Christmas too. And then finally, I decided that I was going to add some glitter to my stockings. I didn't use the trim piece, so I'm adding some glue and some chunky glitter, and this is just going to give it a glittery trim that's not quite as wide as that die piece. So here's a look at that finished card. I love the texture that the texture paste made for the bricks of the fireplace, and I really like that framed sentiment above the fireplace as well. Now let's take a look at some examples from the design team. Melissa made this simple shadow box card with Santa's legs hanging out, but she also made one without Santa, and I love her brick detail and those polka dot stockings that she added hanging from the garland. Maureen made a really fun card. I love the detail of the coloring behind the fire. It looks like there's been a lot of fires in this fireplace and it's nice and charred. I also love her Christmas trees and her wreath above the mantle. Elena's tags are super fun. I love those Santa legs hanging from the tags. They're so bright and cheerful and will brighten up any package. Lynette made this really fun card, and I love how she used the Christmas tree from Christmas Dreams to add to her little scene. Renata's shadow box card is super fun, and I love how she continued the scene around to the side with the stockings hanging on the side of the mantle. And then Elena made this really fun card as well. I love her details above the fireplace with the wreath and the paneling. Thanks so much for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye.